Bruchim Abayim, welcome everyone. We are continuing our journey through Hilchot Shabbat, and we're starting Siman Resh Mem Hey today in Daf Zayin Amud Aleph of the regular Prince of Mishna. This is talking about the shutafut, the partnership between a Jew and a Gentile when it comes to Shabbat. If you have businesses that are partnered between a Yid and a Gentile, how do you deal with the details of that business operating or not operating on Shabbat? Yisraeli v'no Yehudi shesh lahem sadeh tanur. This already is actually a part in Masechet Avodah Zarah that we learned together in Daf Chaf Bet Amud Aleph. Really, that's where we discussed it, and became a discussion within the Tosafot and Rosh and so on. So a Jew and a non-Jew that have a field in partnership, or they have a tanur or a chaim, they have vessels of business like an oven that they bake in, a commercial oven, or they have a mill that people come to use for making their flours and so on. Or they own a business, a store in partnership. If they, from the very get-go of their shutafut, from the very beginning of their partnership, they made a t'nai, they made a condition, or they started it with a clear understanding that the non-Jew gets the entire schar for the Shabbatot, for the Shabbat, and the Jew gets a different day in front, in equivalent with that, not equivalent in measurements, but another day of the week that he gets the payment. Doesn't make a difference if it happens to be a day that everyone's out of town and no business is there, or one of the high business seasons that day makes a lot of money. It doesn't make a difference. Whatever the goy makes, or the business makes on Shabbat, goes to the partner who's not Jewish. And another day throughout the week would be only the Jew. So says the Shulchan, if you had such understanding in the very beginning of your business, mutar, then you could continue the business could be operating on Shabbat, and everything is allowed. But if they did not make this t'nai to begin with, when they come to divide the profit, the revenue of this business, the non-Jew gets all of the schar of all the Shabbats, the hashar cholkim, and the rest of what's remaining, they do 50-50. And if you don't know what the schar of Shabbat is, because you didn't keep track of what the business made on every day, the non-Jew first takes 1/7 of the entire thing, then whatever is left, you divide 50-50 between the two partners. So that's the Shulchan Aruch. Before we go to the Ramah, let's understand this a little bit. And Chafetz Chaim gives us kind of like a little bit of a preface to this Siman, which is important to read, a few 7-8 lines of Hakdama. Da haheter gamur hu be'im ha'Yisrael yesh lo eze esek o melacha b'shutfut im ha'enu Yehudi. You should know, says the Chafetz Chaim, that if you want a complete heter for a partnership with a non-Jew, sheyatnu mitchila kodem shelokchin b'shutafut, that before they even start their partnership, they make it clear between themselves, explicit t'nai. They explicitly mention avod ata beShabbat v'tikach k'fi melachtecha. You work on Shabbat and you get based on what you work on Shabbat. Hen rav or me'at, doesn't make a difference if a lot or a little. Ve'ani evod kinegdecha yom echad b'chol, and I'll work another day of the week alone. Ve'etol k'fi melachti, and I'll take based on the work of that day. ובשעת חלוקה ייטול היינו יהודי שכר עבור השבת, וישראל ייטול יום אחד כנגדו. When it comes to division, they divide whatever on Shabbat was made goes to the goy, whatever was made on the other day of the week that they set up, for instance, let's call it Sundays, it goes to the Jew, and then hen rav, hen rat doesn't make a difference if it was a lot of money, a little money, it's theirs. And then they divide the rest. But if they did not make that Tanai clear from the beginning, and then all of a sudden they come to division and say, wait a second, how do we deal with this? This Shabbat, the Jew was not working, the Goy was working. How do we deal with this? Then, Yitol ha'enu Yehudi schar avur Shabbat, va'Yisrael yitol yom echad kenegdo. Sorry, I skipped here. If he wants to tell the Goy, when they want to divide the profits, you worked on Shabbat alone, so you take the schar of Shabbat, v'ani bechol, and I take one of the days, I take the Sundays. Absolutely asur. You cannot do that. So now, another scenario. If they did not make the Tanai from the beginning, and when it comes to the time for dividing the profits, they did 50-50. They didn't do Shabbat versus Sunday, but just did 50-50. That is a question in the Gemara that ends up without a clear answer. The Rambam is machmir that you can't do that. The Rosh is mekel that you could do that, right? And this becomes, of course, one of the sources for a machloket between Maran and Rama. Maran, who usually follows the Rambam, and there's reason for it in parentheses. A, Maran holds that Rambam was the greatest of the poskim, Gedola poskim he calls him. B, probably more importantly, because the minhag of all of the eastern countries, all of the Sephardi countries, had become like the Rambam. Now, many of the Ashkenaz communities also dealt with Rambam very seriously, but in general, the Ashkenaz communities, they were influenced more by Baalei Tosafot, who were the Gdolei Ador for a period of 150 years in the yeshiva of Baalei Tosafot. It's not just the Rabbeinu Tam, the Ri, the Rashbam, and so on, but it's like a generational link that went through Arei Ashkenaz. So Rosh was one of the Talmud of Maram Rutenberg, was basically considered that continuation of that path as well. You know, the Rosh, the Piskei HaRosh, with the Psakim of the Tosafot, the Rabbeinu Tam, is almost like a loaded gun. It's like a 90+% identical. So that explains why Maran Shulchan Aruch followed the Rambam, unless it was clear, not like him, but again in all of the not just in Eretz Yisrael, but in all of Bavel, Iran, Iraq, Bukhara, the Saudi, all the places that they have in the eastern countries that they had Jews, and also the people who traveled there afterwards. They were all in acceptance of the Psakim of the Rambam that like spread like wildfire in much of those countries, and therefore Maran felt that it's more important to keep the minhag as much as possible, paskening like the Rambam. Again, that's a little bit of a history and little important parentheses over here, and here's not an exception. Maran paskens like Rambam, the Ramah paskens like the Rosh, but only in Makom Hefsed Gadol. In other words, even the Ramah paskens like Rambam lechatchila, that he should be machmir, because it's a ibaya de lo ipshita in the Gemara, but push comes to shove, mikar adin, he's willing to be lenient like the Ramah, like the Rosh. But if they made a condition before they partnered together, and then when it comes to time, in other words, when they became partners, they said, look, you work on Shabbat, I work on Sundays or Mondays, whatever, another day, and you take the schar of Shabbatot, I take the schar of Sundays. Fine, they start working. The Jew doesn't work on Shabbat, only the Goy works. The Goy does not work on Sundays, only the Jew does. Amazing. You're happy, I'm happy, everybody's happy. Then, when they get to the division of the money at the end of the season, they say, this is too complicated to go back and figure out every Shabbat how much you made, every Sunday how much you made. It's too difficult. You know what? Let's just do 50-50. You worked one day alone. I worked one day alone. Right? It doesn't make that much of a difference altogether. Let's just do 50-50, right? Is that mutar? Or does it have to be exactly the schar of Shabbat, exactly the schar of Sundays? Says the Mishna Berura over here, Zehu mutar afla Rambam. That's mutar even according to Rambam. We're going to see more of this in Sif Bet. Zehu ikarei hadinim shbesifim harishonim. This is the structure, says the Chafetz Chaim, of the first Seifim in this Siman, and then the details of them we're going to discuss as we develop this sugya and the details unfold. Says the Mishna Berura, Sadeh o Tanur. Now, first of all, when the Shulchan Aruch says a Jew and a Goy that they partner in a field or in a business, how about if you are partners as shareholders of a company? And that happens much more nowadays, that you own shares of a business. I'm not talking about publicly traded companies necessarily. That is more and less complex in different ways. But even if you're a partnership in a business and you're one of the investors that you're partnered, and your liability is very limited, just partner without a lot of liability, and the Goy is doing the job on Shabbat, then Rav Moshe Feinstein writes in multiple tshuvot of him in Igrot Moshe that even though that you don't have the liability for the losses, right? If he loses money, you don't necessarily lose, right? You're an investor in the business. You're not achrai for the losses. Of course, we're not talking about a bankruptcy case. So in that case, you can't say that this is its own thing, and therefore they're not like po'alim. And therefore, you have to make a condition from the very beginning, says Rav Moshe Feinstein, that Shabbat is only shayach to the Goy, right? And another day is going to be for the Jew. So even though that you have limited liability as a partner, as a silent partner or an investor, you still have to make that thing because you don't want to benefit from the Shabbatot. So therefore, an arrangement in that direction should be made, even in that case. Now, if you have, as a Jew, a partnership with another Jew that's Mechal Shabbat Befaresia, he doesn't keep Shabbat, he doesn't care, and he wants to work on Shabbat, right? So that is a equally, if not more, complex question of how to deal with it. And again, Wozner, Haravadia, his son, they all have tshuvot about this, how to deal with a Mechal Shabbat B'Farisya when they want to work on Shabbat, and of course you're not going to be working on Shabbat, how to go about it, which again, we'll develop this and talk about it a little bit more as we go on. Now, the Mishna Berura writes, the reason for this is because that you need a clear condition. Why do you need a condition? Because the ilav achi kevan de mitchila b'shat asiyat shtafut haymutar lamelacha al shnehem yachtav. Because when you start the shutafut, you are 50% responsible for the business, right? You're 50% partner, 50% is on you. You're responsible for the business. And therefore, if afterwards you tell the goy, well, you do only on Shabbat, when they started the shutafut 50-50, didn't mention anything about Shabbat being alone for the goy. And now he's saying, well, Shabbat I'm not working, you work. And you take whatever revach comes on Shabbat, and I will do a different day, and I'll take the schar of that day for myself. That is equivalent of hiring a goy as your worker on Shabbat. Because think about it, 50% of the responsibility of this business on Shabbat is on you. That's how you started the business. Now you want him to work for you for your 50% part of the business that you are achrai, you are responsible for Shabbat. That is like hiring a person to work for you on Shabbat. And that's not allowed. If from the very beginning, get-go, before you became shutafim, you said, I don't want any chelek in Shabbat, nothing. I am not a partner for Shabbat. You do it alone. Then you don't have a part in Shabbat. But if you were an equal partner in every single day of the business, then you are a partner on Shabbat as well. You're responsible and achrai for Shabbat just like any other part, and therefore it will become a problem when you have to set somebody else to work for you. That's like assuming a worker for you on Shabbat, and therefore it will be problematic. We're out of time right now. We'll B'ezrat Hashem pick this up where we left in the next shiur. Chazak u'Berura.